Good afternoon, everyone. We will be starting momentarily, about one more minute left, and we're going to be starting on time today because we have a lot of important content to cover. So with that, I am going to be kind of moving forward in the next minute or so. So welcome and stay tuned. Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Marcia Scott. I'm the Executive Director with the Delaware League of Local Governments. I am so pleased today to bring to you this panel presentation on the safe system approach to roadway safety. To give you a little bit of background, in January of 2022, the USDOT officially adopted the safe system approach as the guiding paradigm to address roadway safety with its release of the new National Roadway Safety Strategy. The strategy sets a first ever national goal of zero roadway fatalities and commits to specific actions to advance the goal of safe mobility for all people. The session provides an overview of the roadway safety problem, what the safe system approach to roadway safety is, and why it's an effective way to address and mitigate inherent risks in our enormous and complex transportation system, new federal funding opportunities, how the vision of zero deaths is shifting the paradigm for safety, and how Delaware's strategic highway safety plan provides an essential framework for the safe system approach. So just a couple housekeeping items here. As a session participant, you are automatically muted and your video is disabled. We are recording this session to share online. We're going to ask you to hold all your questions until we have all of our panelists get through their material because we have a lot of content that we need to get through. And in preparation for your questions and answers, I am asking you to use kind of the question and answer chat box to type in your questions and use the room chat if you have any technical issues or need support from either me or Melody Barger. And we are so honored to have the following individuals as our panelists. And this is in order of their presentations. We have got Cullen McCormick, who's an associate with Fehr Peers, David Petrucci, who is a senior safety engineer with the U.S. Department of Transportation's Federal Highway Administration, Leah Shaham, the founder and director of the Vision Zero Network, and Nicole Majeski, who is the secretary with the Delaware Department of Transportation. First up today, we have kind of a split presentation on the safe system approach to roadway safety. We will have Cullen McCormick be presenting first, and then Dave Petrucci presenting next. So with that, I will turn it over to Cullen.
Great, thanks so much, Marcia. So I guess really, before we get started here, I think it's important to take a moment to reflect on kind of the reason why we're all here today, which is just simply that every day, folks are getting killed and seriously injured on the roads that we have in this country. And crashes can really irreversibly change the course of human lives, touching victims, their families, loved ones, and society as a whole. So before death and serious injury do not have to be consequences we live with simply to use our road system. Through collective action on the part of all roadway system stakeholders, which is everyone from people who manage the roads, vehicle manufacturers, law enforcement, everyday users, we can move to a safe system approach like Marcia was describing that anticipates human mistakes and keeps impact on the human body at tolerable levels the goal here, of course, is to eliminate fatal and serious injuries for everyone who uses our roads. And so this presentation gives an overview of what that safe system approach looks like. I will walk through kind of the setup here for kind of why this has become important and why this is a focus nationally. And then Dave will walk through a little bit more of the details about the safe system approach. So this is just, again, a quick framing of the presentation here. Really, so the main thing that it's important to focus on is that traffic fatalities are this kind of a public health crisis. I don't think folks think about it in that way regularly, but that's really kind of the crux of the problem that we have here. And as such, it needs really a systemic concerted response. As you can see here from the data on the slide, each year, over 1 million lives are lost globally from traffic crashes. Data here is a little bit out of date as there's a lag in getting the data out there, but as recent as 2018, average of more than 100 people were losing lives on roads each day. And even in Delaware, you can see here locally, the tolls are somewhat staggering. When we look at the trends here historically, again, this does not reflect the most recent years, but you can see that fatalities on the roads have remained stubbornly high, and they're the highest they've really been in about 10 years here. As we all maybe have seen in headlines, this trend really only got worse in the pandemic. You would think that with fewer people driving, maybe safety might improve, but actually that just did not turn out to be the case. And while this trend here for just general loss of lives is very troubling, the trend for pedestrian fatalities, which we'll look at on the following slide, is even more alarming. Whereas the previous slide, you could sort of see somewhat of an even line trending up slightly. You can see here that pedestrian deaths are really on the rise, and the number of people who've been walking on a road struck and killed in motor vehicles has increased more than 50%. While there has been a slight downtick in fatalities in 2017, the last year on record of 2018 was the deadliest year for people killed by drivers while walking since the early 90s. And so these graphs here really demonstrate that unfortunately, as a nation, we're not really making the substantial progress that we need on reducing traffic deaths. And to make those reductions, we're going to need to rethink how we approach safety at a really fundamental level. And so that is sort of the introduction to the safe system approach, was this new paradigm here that is being ushered in at the federal level and then sort of at local levels. The framing is just the idea that people don't necessarily need to have to die on our roads in traffic crashes. And when we think about safety that way, it kind of requires a paradigm shift in how we perceive the problem, moving away from accepting fatalities and serious injuries as a price for mobility to kind of a new approach where the safe system comes in, which is grounded in this idea that we have this imperative, this ethical imperative that no one should be killed or injured when using our roads. And so I'll turn it over at this point to Dave Petrucci from Federal Highway Administration to walk through the remainder of the presentation and introduce the concept of the safe system approach, how it's been applied and how it's being implemented in the United States.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Cullen. It's a pleasure to be with everyone today. I hope you all are well. So I'd like to pick up where Cullen left off and get into some of the details of what we mean by this safe system approach. So the approach itself, in a lot of ways, is really a course correction. It's a new direction. It's a paradigm shift. However you'd like to refer to it, we're really seeing a change in attitude just as much as we're seeing professional and maybe in professional changes, I guess you could say, that are going to really help to focus us on the elimination of fatal and serious injuries among any road user group by perhaps taking another look at the system so that we can better accommodate the fact that people make mistakes. And when people make mistakes, the severity of that mistake shouldn't involve the loss of human life or serious injury. So let's keep the impact on the human body at some measurable level. If we reflect back on maybe high school or college physics, the term kinetic energy stands out, the transfer of kinetic energy. And at a very technical level, as a traffic engineer, That's something that I think of when I think of the safe system approach and how I might change the ways in which I view projects. So we're talking about accommodating human mistakes, and when mistakes occur, keeping the impacts on the human body at some survivable level such that we don't see a fatality, we don't see a serious injury. So this is your safe system approach. I realize this is a very busy graphic, but that's by design, that's deliberate. You can see along the outer circle here, we have uh, several principles. And then within the safe system circle, we have these 5 core elements. And this is what I'd like to briefly describe so you have an idea of what we're talking about here. So along the outside of the circle, we have our principles, we have our beliefs, the truths around which our safe system approach and our collection of attitudes are kind of captured. The first principle being, and you can see it on the very, very top of the circle, death and serious injury is unacceptable. It's not an okay outcome in society. People do make mistakes, and people are vulnerable to mistakes along the transportation system. And as a roadway professional, working with many stakeholders, and when you work with your own partners in the transportation arena, we should share responsibility and understand that responsibility for addressing our safety performance challenges is shared. We should be proactive. That's the next, I think, fifth principle as I'm making my way around this circle clockwise here. And redundancy is crucial. I'll explain a bit more in a moment. Within the safe system circle there, those are the beliefs that we have. We have a set of elements, these core building blocks, if you will, that we are going to work towards in order to satisfy those beliefs. And we can see those 5 elements being safe road users, safe vehicles, safe speeds, safe roads, and post-crash care. So I'd like to briefly touch on the 6 safe system principles, starting with death and serious injury being unacceptable. That's at the very top of the circle, and you'll see there this is the very first item here in the list. These are really based on a framework that we've adopted and developed here at Federal Highway as part of the United States Department of Transportation. But really, that's a core element, a principle, if you will, that's based on not just a belief that we have here, but we've learned from abroad as well. We've seen early adopters of the safe system approach abroad, internationally in Sweden, the Netherlands, Australia, etc., embracing this belief. Similarly, the belief that humans will make mistakes. And as a traffic engineer, and I know as many of you will accept this, and as transportation professionals, we know that people are going to make mistakes when interacting with the systems over which we have responsibility. What can we do when people make mistakes? Hopefully affect some degree of change where we can minimize those mistakes occurring in the first place. But when they do occur, leading to this next principle, we have to understand that humans are vulnerable to the crash experience. That's why we see injury and death. The human body can't sustain a certain level of transferable kinetic energy in the event of an impact. So, however, recognizing that it's not roadways alone that are going, and roadway owners and operators alone that are going to be part of the safe system approach. We share responsibility. As a user, as a pedestrian myself, when I walk in and out of town, when I drive and operate a motor vehicle, I share responsibility just like I would in the workplace. I'm a professional traffic engineer, safety engineer. I have colleagues who specialize in other areas, and outside of my organization, I recognize that responsibility is shared. And we really need to work to ensure that we proactively address safety needs and not just react to past events. And hopefully, while we build a system that can catch one mistake in one layer and help to build redundancy, we are talking about believing that we are going to be able to save people's lives. And we embrace these, really, I think, build these beliefs into practice by the 5 core building block elements: safe road users, safe vehicles, safe speeds, designing safer roads, and ensuring that we have effective post-crash care. There's a lot there. I realize this is a term and probably a collection of terms that in many ways is a little new for you. It's new for a lot of us in the transportation the profession. But I would suspect that a lot of what we're saying maybe can resonate. Uh, where are we on this journey in evolving what we do today to this safe system based approach? Well, we are talking about taking things that we traditionally have done and evolving them. So, for example, perhaps in the past, many transportation engineers have been focused on preventing crashes. With a safe system approach, our focus more so can be on the prevention of death and serious injury. Similarly, evolving from focusing on just getting human experience to better match what we design for, maybe we need to anticipate the fact that people, no matter what we design and employ on the system, people will make mistakes and they have limitations. So we can also manage kinetic energy and maybe not so much focus on controlling speed. Uh, and yes, I think we've heard that people are responsible. There's a certain percent that historically folks have used to describe the number of crashes that are related to human error. I'm not even going to mention that percent deliberately, but it's in an effort to communicate this point that we share responsibility. It's not just users, but designers, all of us together have a responsibility to envisioning or realizing this safe system approach. And we should be a bit more proactive. We shouldn't be reacting on just crashes and events of the past, but anticipating challenges in the future on locations that pose greater risk. So we have a lot of great material from Federal Highway on the safe system approach. I encourage you to check out our website to learn a little bit more. You might be able to Google for this faster than I could copy it into the chat, but Zero Deaths on our Office of Safety webpage is a great resource. I'd like to transition and just provide a few brief remarks on a brand new opportunity through the bill on a discretionary grant program called the Safe Streets and Roads for All. It's a grant program that's now going to be available, and I was allowed to provide some remarks because in an effort to deploy the safe system to change a little bit of what we do in business, this opportunity I think is significant. So this is an important program that's supporting our new national roadway safety strategy that allows initiatives to focus in on preventing death and serious injury. And this is obviously a part of the bill, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or the Infrastructure and Investment and Jobs Act, that appropriates $5 to $6 billion over the next several fiscal years to focus in on reducing death and serious injury on our roadways. So there are a lot of activities that could be eligible for this grant funding, including some of those that are shown here on this slide, including the development of action plans and the development of projects as well. However, one important aspect of this program is that the activities identified or supported through this discretionary program would be connected to the action plan. So these are activities that would most likely reduce in a significant way or eliminate fatalities and serious injuries among a class or collection or among all road users. So typically, I think this is a good list of eligible applicants based on the law and what we now have from the Office of the Secretary. That most likely we're talking about political subdivisions, MPOs, and other organizations that are eligible for this funding. It is very much a locally focused funding opportunity. And there are some rules. You can see some percentages there about certain percentages not exceeding a certain value, and how there is a federal share versus a local share component to these projects. So if you're interested in more information about this program and what it could do for your community, I would strongly encourage you to check out what we have posted right now on transportation.gov/NRSS, or get on this email listserv. at SSVA or 4A@dot.gov for more information. So those are some remarks. I hope this has been helpful on the safe system approach, and perhaps a really terrific opportunity for the safe system approach by way of the Safe Streets for All discretionary grant program. So with that, I'd like to transfer, I think, the virtual podium over to Leah, who is up next. Thank you very much.
So I'm advancing the other slide here. Hi, all. Thank you, Cullen and Dave, for providing such important information on why a safe system approach is needed and how Federal Highways is pivoting to advance this approach. And I think that the federal grant opportunities through the bipartisan infrastructure law for local governments, especially, these are targeted to local governments. I think it's going to be a phenomenal opportunity to even get the plans in place for additional funding. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Leah Shaham, who's the founder and director of the Vision Zero Network. Leah?
Okay. Thanks so much, Marcia. And thanks everybody for having me. I'm thrilled to be here. Anytime anybody wants to talk about Vision Zero and all of the important pieces that David and Cullen just spoke of, I am thrilled. So I just want to share a little bit about us quickly. Here we go, make sure, yes. Vision Zero Network, we're a nonprofit. I'm based out in California, but we're working with communities across the country and thrilled, very happy to be working more with Delaware communities. So hope to stay in touch. What we're trying to do is support communities on the ground. We're mainly working with local and regional, but open to all levels, really to help people understand what is Vision Zero and how do we really use it to shift the paradigm and save lives. So I know this was shared, but I wanted to highlight a few things within this tragic number. I think Cullen started out, reminding us why we're here, why this work is so important. And sadly, the most recent data that's been shared, we have estimates that 46,000 people were killed in 2021 in preventable traffic crashes. I really want to emphasize that preventable part, and we'll talk about it. But within this number, I want to highlight, unfortunately, that youth are particularly impacted. In fact, traffic deaths are the number one, or leading cause of death of youth in our country and around the world. We also know that people walking and biking hugely are disproportionately hurt and killed. We also know that Black Americans, Native Americans are disproportionately impacted and hurt and killed. We also know that people in low-income neighborhoods are disproportionately hurt and killed. So really important to think about this, obviously, as a safety issue, as a health issue, but also as an equity issue. So really wanted to frame that. Moving to more positive, I guess I would say, positively saying that people are ready for change. I really appreciated, David, you talked about, I think you said a course correction, and we often talk of this paradigm shift. It really is. I want to start by saying, whatever you think Vision Zero and the safe system approach are, there's lots of pieces to it. I want to say what it's not, what it's really not, what those things are not. They're not just slogans. They're not just taglines. They're not just a new name or a new title to put on your existing programs. It's not those things. It really is a change in how we're doing business. And I'm showing this picture from New York just because I really want to honor the fact that New York City was the first community in the US to commit to Vision Zero, the goal of zero traffic deaths or severe injuries among all road users. That's people driving, walking, biking, transit, scooters, everyone. But we, really saying, hey, we need to do things differently. This is not acceptable. And hopefully you can see, here's a map of all the communities. Well, most of the communities, I think there's a few we need to add to the map, to be honest, but there's more than 45 communities we're recognizing here in the US as Vision Zero communities. So, as diverse as, DC to Macon, Georgia, to Laredo, Texas, to Eugene, Oregon, to Minneapolis, really wide range. These are communities where their top elected officials, and this is important, this isn't just a Department of Transportation commitment. That's not enough, to be honest. You need to have that political and policy commitment and understanding. So in all of these places where we are recognizing the Vision Zero commitment, you've got your top electeds, your mayor, your city council, maybe it's a city manager, and your departments of transportation, and your departments of public health, and your police departments on board. Obviously, community as well. We'll talk about that. But I really want to recognize how much this has grown, this commitment, just in the last 7 years, so relatively quickly. For us, though, it really is about depth over breadth. Honestly, we don't give credit, so to speak, if someone just uses the phrase Vision Zero. Again, it's not about just tagging your existing work with a new phrase or terminology. It really is about doing things differently. And I know David went through this really well, so I won't spend too much time, but really thinking about evolving beyond the traditional approach. This is not to be critical of the traditional approach. We'll talk about the E's in a minute, the traditional E's of education, enforcement, engineering, et cetera, another E, but we still need those E's. We want them, we need them, but we need to be right sizing them and using them, frankly, more appropriately. And we'll talk about that. So I'm going to skip over this because I know the former speakers did a lot of work on that. I want to talk a little bit more about what the systems approach to safety might really look like in your everyday lives. I'm assuming we have a lot of transportation professionals on the line, folks throughout Delaware, city, county, state folks who are thinking about transportation issues every day. Hopefully you can read this. It's a little bit small, I realize, but this is a public health diagram often used in public health realms. We're applying it to traffic safety. And like David said, traffic safety and the huge number of traffic deaths is a public health issue. So how are we thinking about it more as a public health issue, and how are we approaching it with public health solutions? So on the very bottom in the yellow, some of the areas are things like promoting community education and strengthening individual knowledge and skills. Those are important. Those are things like education campaigns, promotion, how to drive safely, how to walk across the street safely. Those are important. We need to keep doing those. I'm not going to dismiss that, of course. Those are important. But frankly, we've spent much more energy there than we have on the upstream approaches. And we need to spend more on the upstream. So examples of that in our world of transportation, here you'll see influencing policy and legislation, changing organizational practices. Examples of those are changing speed limits. And by that, I mean lowering speed limits, especially where we have people walking, biking, driving. So mixing modes. Changing road design to encourage safer, slower speeds, adding traffic calming devices, making a transit-only lane or pedestrian-only space. These are policy or organizational decisions. They're not individual decisions. So this is not to diminish responsibility on the individual, but it is to say, frankly, we've not been, and let me say, accentuating or flexing our muscles enough at that upstream approach. So here's another kind of diagram that I think is helpful. You'll see in the kind of bottom right circle, individual road users. Again, we all need to be safe. Move over to the next one. If road users make mistakes, and really that should say when road users make mistakes sometimes, because they do sometimes, we do sometimes, right? I'm sure we've all been there, maybe you're speeding without meaning to, or maybe someone makes a bad choice, driving drunk. People do things that are not perfect. We are fallible, right? So what we're trying to really say is, hey, look up to the top circle, system planners and policymakers. Those are street designers and people who set speeds, et cetera. We need to make sure that we're thinking about those designs and those policies and how to be safe first. So some examples of that. Well, I'll come to that in a second, but I want to highlight that, we might pause and think, hey, this is overwhelming. How do we do all this? Well, when you look at and I'd encourage, if you haven't done this, to please do so. When you really look at the problems on the street, they're not evenly spread. These are just a few examples. I pulled literally just a few. I could pull this from everywhere we work, but I'll focus on Denver. In Denver, 50% of the traffic fatalities occur on just 5% of the streets. And you'll see similar San Francisco, LA. What I'm showing with this is that we have an absolute disproportionate problem on a relatively small number of streets. Now that's disconcerting, but it's powerful because it means we can make change. We can know where to focus attention. And this is a really big part of what we're really focusing on, is pivoting to the safe system approach. So how do you really do this? Stepping back again. I mentioned the traditional E's approach of engineering, education, enforcement. We really want to think about how do we move beyond those E's, again, using the E's, but really think in a more holistic and frankly less siloed way. Right now, it's like, oh, that's a traffic engineering problem. Send it over there. Oh, that's a police problem. Send it over there. In reality, there's a lot of overlap and fluidity in these. And we're going to talk about some examples of that. So some of the ways that we really lift up this new approach, and it is new for the US, it really is. The safe systems approach is focusing on these three areas: complete streets, a really obvious one, thinking about how are our most physically vulnerable road users, people walking and biking, in wheelchairs, on scooters, how are we making it safe for them, especially because they obviously are more vulnerable? Thinking about managing speed for safety, because it's obviously such a crucial component, that those high speeds. And I want to note, I'm not talking about speeding. Speeding is a problem, yes. But an example of the difference of a safe system approach and the traditional approach would focus a lot on speeding. So, hey, Leah, don't speed. Don't go over the speed limit, right? Trying to educate or enforce that I do the right thing and not go, misbehave by speeding. That's one area. What the safe systems approach is saying is, hey, we need to spend more time on managing the systems for speed. How are we designing that road to bring the speeds down? How are we lowering the speed limit to bring the speeds down? How are we using technology in vehicles, perhaps cameras, outside vehicles? Those are all systems changes. Those are upstream, right? I individually can't go manage those systems, but you all as system designers and policymakers can. So I just wanted to mention that as another example. And then really to highlight integrating racial and health equity in all we're doing, and to really highlight safe systems, not traffic stops. We really want to show that this is not about throwing more police at the problem. We actually really don't want to be encouraging that more. Can we really be thinking about how to focus on the systems? So again, I talked about managing speed for safety. If there's one image I would show, or one graphic I would show, it would be this 20, 30, 40 example of at 20 miles per hour, a person walking has a 90% chance of survival. But if that vehicle is going 40 miles per hour, my chance of survival decreases to 10%. Those are huge numbers, huge numbers. So really think about that. How are you setting speed limits? How are you designing roads? That's the most important, so that you're physically encouraging the design of 20 miles per hour or 25 miles per hour. Again, where you have people interacting. I'm not talking about I-95 here, obviously. I'm talking about Main Street, or your neighborhood streets, your commercial corridors, your transit corridor. We control these speeds through design and through speed limit procedures. So that is really the most important lever for managing speed, and specifically for decreasing severity of problems and crashes and injuries from crashes. The other piece is designing complete streets. You all know this well. I'm not going to talk too much about it, but I'm going to pick on my hometown where I was raised, Jacksonville, Florida. Here, you'll see some kids walking and then a person biking. These folks do not have good choices, right? There's no sidewalk on this street. There's no bike lane. They're really not. This is not an area where you can educate or enforce, right? So how are we recognizing that and actually giving them good options, good sidewalks, good bikeways? And here's an example, very different location, but a place where they can design and say, yeah, we're going to have a mix of modes. Let's design for that. So I just want to quickly wind down with a few examples. Fremont, California, out near where I live. It's a mid-sized city, more suburban in style, but they've really committed to dedicate more space to walking, biking, to lowering speed limits. And you'll see that they've had a significant decrease in traffic deaths. Sadly, it did increase again most recently, as someone mentioned. We're seeing that, unfortunately, with the pandemic, but they have seen sustained decreases since their Vision Zero commitment. And it's not that they just slapped the Vision Zero name on. It's much more that they made changes. And here's some examples of their changes in Fremont, California. They're working to manage speeds through signal timing, adding more crosswalks, redesigning streets, building better bikeways, et cetera. And then they're working with the state to try and make some state level changes. Of course, you can't do this on your own as locals or as counties. You really do need the state's true partnership in this and support. New York City, I know this is a very different place than most of our communities, any community really, it's so big. But again, this is an example of, the first city that committed to Vision Zero and how far they've come. So they lowered speed limits. They added cameras near schools, speed cameras near schools. They proactively redesigned intersections that were problematic to slow cars down. You see here with the buffers, this was slowing the cars down. Denver, Colorado recently lowered their speed limits in residential areas from 25 to 20, as is Portland, Oregon, as is Charlotte, North Carolina. It's really, really diverse. I'm just showing you a few examples, and wanted to share some state examples too. Here in California, my state department, Caltrans, State Department of Transportation, has officially embraced the safe system approach, which means real changes. Again, it's not just slapping the words on. It means they're reducing speeds and requiring complete streets designs in all projects. So really some game-changing stuff. And wanted to give credit to places like Colorado, investing more in green transportation, and also Massachusetts, really, I would say, a leader statewide in helping locals and counties lower speed limits because they know it leads to safety, more safety. And winding down, I want to say huge thanks to the U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, who made this commitment. You know, as Marcia kicked off today, we have a new national goal, first ever goal of zero traffic deaths in this country. And why that's so important, again, is because, you know, yes, that is the right, the ethical, the moral thing to do. We all want that because we want to be safe. We want our loved ones to be safe. But it's also important because it's going to make your work, I would say, more urgent, more well-supported politically, better funded. You know, David talked about the funding. So how are we really getting behind this massive paradigm shift? I'm going to skip over this, but if you haven't yet read the National Roadway Safety Strategy, please do. It really is a major change. Again, this is a paradigm shift. It's going to take time. It's not going to happen overnight. It can't just be words, but it really is going to change the way we do business. And we know that Vision Zero is possible when we look at what's out there today, a combination of existing technologies and existing policy and design changes. We did an analysis showing that we have the know-how. We literally have the tools and strategy existing today to save or prevent, I should say, prevent 75% of the traffic deaths out there if we put all of these strategies into place. So I'm going to wind down and say thank you so much to everyone. And here's my contact information. And I look forward to questions now. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. And we are going to hold questions until the end of everybody's presentation. I just want to thank you for how you framed Vision Zero as a safety, health, and equity issue, and the need to really evolve our transportation system beyond traditional approaches. So with that, I want to turn it over to Nicole Majeski, who's the Secretary of the Delaware Department of Transportation. We are so honored to have her here today. And I just wanted to thank her so much and the Delaware Department of Transportation for sponsoring this important session today. We do have this recorded and we want to put it on the league's website and provide an opportunity for really anyone who wants to view this and understand this to do so. So with that, I will turn it over to Secretary Majeski. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Marcia, and thank you so much for having us today. And we are more than happy to be a sponsor of this session to talk about a topic that is extremely important and one that we need everyone's assistance with. So I'm happy that I get to, hold on one second. Hopefully I can, did I just advance the screen? Hopefully I did. I'm glad that I get to go last because I can kind of take what the previous speakers talked about, especially at the national level, and really break that down for you so I can give you a snapshot of where we are here in Delaware with our roadway fatalities and serious injuries, and then also explain how we've already taken the safe system approach that USDOT has kind of put out there, and we've already been incorporating those philosophies and tactics into our strategic highway safety plan and how it all works together. So let me just start. We start all of our presentations with our mission, which is to provide excellence in transportation, every trip, every mode, every dollar, and everyone. And then I'm going to start here with some sombering news and statistics. This is our chart that tracks our roadway fatalities. So you have a snapshot here of our roadway fatalities for 2019, 2020, and 2021. We actually had 139 fatalities last year, which was the highest we've had in the last 15 years. You'll see in 2019, we had 133, and in 2020, we had 117. The different types of crashes are broken down here, whether it was vehicle, pedestrian, motorcyclist, and then the different crash types. These are all things that we are constantly monitoring and research. You'll see that we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of motorcycle fatalities over the last year, and again, an increase in those pedestrian fatalities. So we take this data and we work with our partners in law enforcement and the Office of Highway Safety and the Department of Safety and Homeland Security, and we analyze this data very much. And I think one of the other speakers had talked about was, we not only are looking at the fatalities, we're looking at the serious injuries as well. Those crashes are just as important to us as the fatality ones, because we don't want any crashes on our roadway. Our goal is towards 0 deaths, but we also want to minimize the number of actual crashes that we have on the roadways each and every day. So this is our chart that shows the combination of the number of fatalities and serious injuries that we've seen over the last 11 years. So if you look again at that 2021 year, last year, we had that 139 fatalities and about 542 serious injury crashes. So it's important that DOTs are looking at all of these incidences so that we can improve safety along our corridors. Now, I'm going to talk about our strategic highway safety plan, and this is something that is we like to call like our roadmap for safety. So you'll see that it's towards 0 death, and that has been our standard here at the Delaware Department of Transportation for a number of years now. We're happy that the national DOT, that we now have kind of the national standard of towards 0 deaths, but it is something that I think you will see a lot of departments of transportation across this country have already been focusing on. So we're happy that Federal Highways and US DOT is now officially kind of making that the standard for everyone. This is a comprehensive, data-driven 5-year plan for us, and this is really our roadmap on how are we going to improve safety along our corridors. Now, Delaware is unique in that you all know that we, as the state, own and maintain 90% of the roads here. And while that 10% that's left is really some of the municipal roads that you all may have under your purview, or those private roads. Typically, you'll see a state Department of Transportation actually responsible for only 20%. But here in Delaware, we are unique in that 90% of the roads are under our control. So it's really mindful. We take that into consideration, and we're really mindful of that because we need to have a comprehensive plan that focuses on every type of roadway, from your locals to your highways, so, and everything in between. So we are using crash data. This plan really is identifying our emphasis areas that we need to focus on with our partners. Now, those 4 E's that you heard about from our previous speaker, they are important, and those are things that we're incorporating: the engineering, the enforcement, the education, and our emergency services, medical services, incorporating into all this. But I think along the lines of what you just heard from the Vision Zero Network is that we are kind of taking a different approach to these traditional E's, if you will, and we are incorporating and making it more of a holistic thing, because we know that it's not just one element that is needed for improving safety; it's all of it combined together. So our goal, as I said, overall, is to get towards 0 deaths. I mean, our that is the ultimate goal. 1 death on our highway is way too many, and so the ultimate goal is to get to 0. What we hope to achieve in the next 5 years is to reduce fatalities and serious injuries on our roadways by 15%. And we're going to focus on our 8 different emphasis areas. So you'll see when we look at our crash data and really break down, trying to understand, why did this accident happen? Where did it occur? What were the factors associated with it? What we see is that our emphasis areas need to include intersections, distracted driving, impaired driving, roadway departures, pedestrians, motorcyclists, unrestrained motorists, and speeding. We have traffic records here because that traffic data piece is so critical in the analysis that we're doing to determine, what improvements are needed. So this data-driven approach that we've done is that in doing this analysis of the traffic records and the crash data, that 94% of all fatalities occurred in one of these emphasis areas, and that 85% of all serious injuries crashes occurred in one of these 8 emphasis areas. So one of the new emphasis areas for us is distracted driving. That is now a focal point because we're seeing more and more fatals or serious injury crashes associated with distracted driving. So what I would like to, and this again is just the breakdown of those emphasis areas. The objective again is that 15% reduction across each and every emphasis area over the next 5 years. Throughout our strategic highway safety plan, we have strategies and actions that are identified. We have overall goals that we've identified, but then we break down each individual emphasis area and determine, what action is needed in order to reduce the number of fatalities and serious injuries that we have in that specific emphasis area. So just quickly, I'm going to walk through a lot of this, and this really kind of goes to that holistic approach. So what we have done here is look at the 2015 to 2019 crash data to look at those fatalities and serious injuries for each of these emphasis areas. And it was really important that you overlap the information because very, very few accidents are only because of one particular thing. There may be multiple factors at play when you're looking at a crash. And it's important for us to understand that and to look at all of those emphasis areas. So again, that's really the goal here. And so intersections as being one of our first emphasis areas, intersection-related crashes accounted for over 39% of all fatalities and serious injuries during this time frame. And 51% occurred at signalized intersections. So for us, that data is really important from an engineering standpoint to look at that, to say, what improvements do we need to be doing? And so that's where we kind of come up with what are the strategies. So everything from those intersection improvements, making sure that we are reducing the number of conflict points that we are there. And each one of these does result in, is it enforcement? Is it red light camera enforcement to reduce the number of red light running crashes that we have? Is it education about, making sure that as you're approaching an intersection, you're looking for pedestrians and bicyclists. You're not just it's not just made for vehicles. We have to be multimodal, and we have to remind drivers and pedestrians and bicyclists that you have to share the road and you have to look for everybody. So again, it's that holistic approach of making sure that, we're taking all those E's, if you will, into consideration. So when we look at distracted driving, and this, again, as I mentioned, is one of the new emphasis areas for us. But what we've seen from a crash standpoint is, again, 44% of distracted driving crashes are rear end crashes, and 17% are occurring during those afternoon peak travel times. So when people are stuck in traffic or are going to and from, they're getting, they're stuck in traffic and they're looking at their phone, or they're doing something to be distracted. And so that is really important data for us to have. And so you're seeing those crashes occur, overlapping it at intersections, different factors as well. So again, it's really important for us from our standpoint is again, education, enforcement. We also want to make sure that from an engineering standpoint that we're doing everything we can to keep the motorist, attentive. So whether that's the installation of rumble strips or the installation of highway high friction surface treatment, that we've got appropriate lighting, signage, all of those things, that we want the attention of the driver to be on the road and not on their handheld device. Impaired driving, unfortunately, this continues to be an issue. We see the majority of our impaired driving crashes involve roadway departures, speeding, and unrestrained motorists. So for us, this continues to be something that we work with our Office of Highway Safety on. And again, it's education, it's enforcement, it's DUI checkpoints, but it's also having, back to what I said about the distracted driving, is, an impaired driver, there's only so much that you can do. But again, if those rumble strips helps to keep them onto the road, or help keep them from crossing the median by having high tension cable barrier, those are the things that we're looking at. Roadway departures, as I just mentioned, with the high tension cable barrier, we've noticed that about 20% of our roadway departure, that 20% of our fatalities are because of roadway departures or those crossover crashes. And about 48% of them are occurring at roadways where there's horizontal curves. And a lot of the time, speeding could be playing a factor into that because they're going too fast and they're not able to navigate those curves. So again, overlapping the data is really key to identify those things. And so, as I mentioned before, looking from an engineering standpoint, how do we slow people down? How do we whether it's that surface treatment to slow people down, signage, lighting, all of those things are really important so that it's that warning of you're approaching a horizontal curve, you need to slow down, reducing the speed limit as you're approaching to that. All of those things are taken into consideration. Pedestrians. So pedestrians account for about 25% of all fatalities, about 9% of serious injury crashes when we looked at the data from 2015 to 2019. And as I mentioned, we had an increase in the number of pedestrian fatalities over in this past year. The majority of them are occurring, 63% are occurring in Newcastle County. More densely populated areas is where we're seeing those crashes occur. And so from a Department of Transportation standpoint, we want our system to be multimodal. And for so long, I think we were very vehicle-centric around how we were designing roads and bridges. And now the shift has been occurring over time, and it's even more so now, is that as we're designing projects, we're looking at making sure that we've got safe pedestrian access, bicycle lanes. Do we have adequate, if there's a transit stop, adequate bus stops for people? All of these things are extremely important. So again, there is that education piece that goes along with this and how to walk safe. And as a driver, to be reminded to share the road. But it's from our standpoint, we need to make sure that we have those complete streets, as was mentioned before, and that we have these sidewalk connections and we have adequate crosswalks with pedestrian signals and lighting and all of these things, that we are focused on separating the modes of traffic to keep of transportation to keep people as safe as possible. Motorcyclists, this was the most significant increase that we'd seen over the last year in motorcycle fatalities. They're about 12% of all of our fatals that are occurring on our roadways. And unfortunately, 37% of all motorcycle fatalities are the motorcyclist was not wearing a helmet. You know that is the law here in Delaware. You don't actually have to be wearing it. And that's, I know there's varying opinions of that, but obviously from our standpoint, we want to do everything we can to strengthen motorcycle safety enforcement. We want to make sure, again, that people are sharing the road and that they're being mindful of the fact that you don't just have vehicles out there, that there's multiple modes of transportation that are on the road with you. Unrestrained motorist, unfortunately, this is probably one of the most frustrating things, is that people are still not wearing seatbelts, which 25% of fatalities that occurred in this time period were individuals that were not wearing their seatbelt. So that is, again, one of the most frustrating things from us, something that we work with Office of Highway Safety on from an education piece. We work with law enforcement to make sure that we have proper, we assist people at our DMVs with child car seats, making sure that they're properly installed in cars. All of these things are just so important to us. And again, it's just one of the most frustrating things for us that, that we still have so many fatalities that are occurring because people are not properly buckled in. And then last, speeding. We have seen an uptick in speeding over the last year. I think with the pandemic, we saw traffic volumes decrease pretty substantially in 2020 and then kind of continuing into 2021. And so less cars on the road, less congestion, people drove faster. So I think, and again, we have to look at this from every type of roadway in our system. So not just those locals, but also our highways and our collectors and arterials, all of them in between. So speeding also does commonly overlap with other of these emphasis areas. So we have to be mindful of that. And we, from there is that enforcement piece, there's the education piece, but I think from our piece, and this was something that was mentioned previously with the speaker, is that we're looking at all different types of ways and solutions to slow people down. And it can't just be enforcement. It also, we are looking at the roadway types and doing traffic calming, installing, different traffic calming devices. We are looking at reducing speed limits in certain areas. We're doing what we call road diets, which is really kind of narrowing the lanes, and which, as you're approaching it, you automatically want to slow down. Things of that nature. We are constantly looking at, so that we're not just, again, have these wide open roads that encourage people to drive fast. We have to be mindful of all of these things, and that, again, going back to that, we need to have multimodal transportation networks across our state. That's really the goal for us. So again, we can't do this alone. So we need everyone to ensure that crashes don't lead to fatal or serious injuries. We have a very strong partnership with the Office of Highway Safety, with law enforcement, with the Department of Safety and Homeland Security, and really all the advocates. We got input from everybody as we were developing the Strategic Highway Safety Plan. And then from all of you, I would say, what can you do? Local governments, what can you do? We are unique in that the state is responsible for transportation, but local governments are responsible for those land use decisions. And so having that partnership with each other, making sure as you are doing your comprehensive plans that you're incorporating traffic and transportation into those plans, that you're using that complete streets model. We are more than happy to assist you in any of those endeavors, and working to create transportation improvement districts where we're identifying what a geographical area and what do we want that to look like as it's developed into the future, and what are the transportation improvements that are needed to support it, and to make sure that we are looking at it from a multimodal standpoint. Again, we ask everybody to do their part. We cannot do this alone. This is something that we need everyone's help in. And as was mentioned, with the bipartisan infrastructure law now that's in place, there is ample opportunity for us to apply for these discretionary grants. And as the state, we most likely will be taking the lead in a lot of this, but we look forward to working with you if you have interest, and partnering with you on local projects to improve safety overall. So my final slide here, that those takeaways is that one death on our roadways is way too many, and that we all have to be working together in order to achieve our goal of towards 0 deaths. And looking at this from a comprehensive approach is really the key. So thank you all for your time. And if you do want information about our Strategic Highway Safety Plan, it is available on the DelDOT website.
Marcia, you're on mute. Oh.
Well, I guess if people have questions, they can put them in the chat box, right? Let's see. I'm happy to read it. I'll read the question. I'll take over the moderating duties here temporarily. So we do have a question. And David, I'm not sure if you responded to it. But it was, does safe systems work more effectively when localities set speed limits based on local conditions and prevention without regards to the 85th percentile test and crash data? If so, how do we get the traditional 85th percentile engineering study removed from the MUTCD as the engineering study required for lowering speed limits? Does this require legislative change? So David, did you want to?
Yeah, thank you, Nicole. I started putting in an answer there. I hit enter. So there's not a lot that I can say right now, but we all are aware of the fact that the MUTCD is currently in development, or an update is under development. There was a public comment period that recently wrapped up, and I know that our team at headquarters is actively working on an update. There are also requirements related to the MUTCD inside of the bill. So I think it's reasonable to expect that there are changes. The MUTCD's latest revision, and I mean the latest version, is the 2009 version. In the future, I think it's a good bet that we'll be seeing many changes. I just can't get into what a number of those changes are, including the one that Rosemary is getting at there. But I will say about the safe system approach, in my opinion, we are talking about speed being a critical part of the challenge, a critical part of the approach. But it's not just speed itself. When a mistake occurs, regardless of the context, regardless of speed, what's a likely outcome in that roadway environment at that collision angle with that mass and velocity and the combination thereof? Thinking of kinetic energy back to high school physics or college physics, if you happen to take those, what's the likely outcome for the human being? So I think that we're not talking about universally across all parts of a system lowering speed. I don't think that we're talking about taking higher speed limit interstate facilities and reducing them to much lower speed limit facilities like we would along a local system. I think it's more about establishing harmony between what we build and operate and the operating lines or the operating conditions that a user would have. So that's my upfront response. I hope that helps.
And for those of you not familiar, MUTCD stands for the Manual for Unified Traffic Control Devices, also known as the Bible of all traffic engineers. We have lots of acronyms in the transportation world.
That's one of the trickiest acronyms, I always think. And I'll just add that I was really encouraged in the National Roadway Safety Plan or strategy that I know we've referred to a bunch, that safe speeds is really called out. As you saw in the presentations, it's called out as a principle, but also that the U.S. Department of Transportation really emphasized that, again, we need to be thinking more upstream about the roadway design, how speeds are set. There have been some many clear analyses, including from the National Transportation Safety Board, showing that the 85th percentile approach to setting speed, and I won't get all wonky for those who don't know it, look it up, but I'll say when I describe it, it makes my head spin a little bit, so I won't. But the very common 85th percentile speed setting approach, frankly, is outdated and is not as effective as it should be. So there's really a move in many places towards context-sensitive speed setting, where we are looking at, of course, looking at injury and crash data, but also looking at the land use and the context and the uses, right? Are people walking and biking? What kind of crashes are we seeing? What kind of activity do we want to be encouraging? What kind of road design, rather than the very narrow 85th percentile approach, which is largely about how fast are people going today? Let's set the speeds based on that. So I'd say this is a really important one where the feds can't, the federal agencies don't tell you what to do on this one. State by state, they're deciding. So, if as a local or a county, you're thinking, oh, we want to lower speeds, we want to design differently for speeds, I think this is a really important one to dig into, do an analysis to say, okay, where we're having serious crashes, are speeds set too high? Are roads designed for higher speeds than we want? What can we do to change that? And it might be a case where you need to go to your state agency and get help in changing that. So, that's one where you don't need to wait for some federal rule to change, to be honest. There's a lot to be done, I would say, even now. Thanks.
And Rosemary, I'm not exactly sure where you're from, what town, if you are from one of the local towns, but please feel free to reach out to us. Peter Haig, our chief traffic engineer, is actually one of the is participating as well. But whenever we hear from a local town or municipality, most of the time it ends up being a state maintained road and not one of the local roads. And sometimes maybe they overlap a little bit. But his section is the one that will do the traffic study. We'll come out, we'll meet with you. We'll look at the observations, the traffic, the crash data, all that stuff, and we'll work with you and determining if we need to lower the speed limit. Oh, Marcia, it doesn't look like you're on mute, but we still can't hear you. not sure. Can you type in the chat, maybe? I don't know. Is there any other questions that people have or want to put in the chat? Oh. I'm not sure what our time frame was for how much time we have left. I think we may actually be over. I think we were supposed to be concluded at 2:15. She's nodding yes. All right. Is anyone else seeing any other questions? I don't think.
Can anybody hear me now?
Oh, there you are. There you are.
Oh. I have a new computer. She did a hard reset, Melody, on me, and it went dead, and now I'm back up with my volume. I just wanted to thank everybody, and I apologize for the technical difficulties at the end. Rosemary Hardiman is the mayor of the town of Bethany Beach. I know the coastal communities had a high interest in working directly with the Delaware Department of Transportation in partnering on some of these approaches, the safe system approach, and learning more about it. And the other thing that I wanted to convey in my role as the executive director of the Delaware League of Local Governments, there is a high need to build capacity for our small communities. With some of them have their own roads that are maintained by them. Most of them are DelDOT roads, but we want to build capacity for our local governments, towns, cities, even the counties, to better compete for federal funding opportunities, especially this new safe systems, safe streets and roads for all grants. So we would very much like to partner with DelDOT and our MPOs to have a consortium that could kind of go after the funds that are directed for planning activities and implementation. So I hope we can continue this discussion and involve more of our local governments in
Absolutely.
the future. Look forward to it.
Like I said, Peter, Haig, and I are happy to come to the next League of Local Governments meeting and maybe do a mini presentation for you all. But we welcome the partnership, and Rosemary will reach out to you with regards to the beach.
So I just wanted to thank again Leah Shaham, David Petrucci, Cullen McCormick, and Secretary Majeski for taking their time to really explain what this approach is all about. And we hope to better connect with you in the future on some of the issues that we have here in Delaware and how to resolve them. Thank you all. Thank you for participating. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.